So we're gonna have some fun tonight. Welcome to the lab. I haven't said that in a little while, but it's fun to say. So as Rachel said, I'm one of the co-founders here of the Lab Miami, and it's really special to be able to share this evening with the one and only Joseph Furst. Joe and I go way back. But Joe was an instrumental part of making this venture, making this space, and making this neighborhood happen. So I owe a lot of debt of gratitude to Joe and to the work he's done. So for me, it's a very important and emotional night here with you all. So we'll just jump right into it. Joe and I are going to have fun. We'll talk about some of the great things about the neighborhood, some of the challenges that the neighborhood faces and the city faces. And meanwhile, learning hopefully a whole lot more about Joe as an entrepreneur and visionary, which I think he is. He may not use those words about himself, but I'm going to use them tonight. And I think we're going to base ourselves. So I moved back to Miami in 2011 with some buddies to start this venture, and we had no idea what we were doing. We had no idea where to start and where to go and where to start this thing. So Joe and I share an alma mater. We went to the same high school. He's just a few years older than I am, but he was one of the folks that I knew was in the neighborhood and on the ground in the real estate scene here. And so he was instrumental in guiding us to Winwood as a location for this concept of a lab. And so I think it's important to go back to 2011, if you can in your mind, Joe, and take us back, we'll just jump right into it, to what Winwood was at that point. How long had you been working in Winwood? Kind of, if you can help us lead into you arriving to Winwood and maybe place us there.
So 2011, I guess just a quick backstory for me. So I'm a lawyer by practice and training. I practiced for a couple of years. Went back to business school and finished business school in 2007 when obviously the world was in crisis, an economic crisis. And by sort of some good fortune and then a lot of hard work, sort of created this opportunity to work with Goldman Properties here in Winwood. And I started in the beginning of 2008. So from 2008 to 2011, maybe we'll go back to that at some point in time, but in 2011 was a really interesting time. We had kind of created the first 2 or 3 tenants that I would consider to be transformative for what we were trying to create in the neighborhood. I think us as real estate people, or there's a lot of terms for this, placemakers, developers, whatever it may be, I think our job is very simple. It's just finding good people that have good concepts, that are talented, that are going to work hard to try to build a community around. So in 2011, to give you perspective, we had probably just signed Panther Coffee. So quick backstory on that, I was here in Winwood because I was here 7 days a week, met this husband and wife that were super compelling from the Pacific Northwest on the street. They were actually about to sign a lease east of Midtown, and sort of explained to them what we were doing here, helped finance their business and sign that deal, and obviously Panther Coffee turned into what you know it. We had not yet started the Winwood building over to that direction, so the only things that were really here on the street is that we had finished the light box at Goldman Warehouse, which hadn't necessarily opened yet, but we had signed that deal and had started working on that. And we had previously had MoCA, the Museum of Contemporary Art, have a satellite destination here. And the reason why that was so important was it was really cemented the neighborhood as a legitimate arts district by having an institution in the space right next door, which the Miami Light Project ended up moving into. So that's, I guess, the general lay of the land. There was no business improvement district. There were no New York investors. There was no development. It was actually just probably maybe at the peak of the fun scale of my work in Winwood.
So Joe and I both grew up here. Winwood wasn't a place that we went out or socialized in. I mean, I remember a party called Revolver that wasn't too far from here. Southern Design District, I guess, was where that was. But when you started with the work with Goldman Properties, what attracted you about the neighborhood, or was it the company and what they were doing?
Yeah, so my professional story I actually think is interesting. I don't know what people are doing or what they want to be doing, but I think mine is interesting because I was a really just a punk kid for my whole life that didn't really give a shit about doing anything or working that hard. And when I went away, I went to law school. I didn't like practicing law, and I went back to business school, and I sort of drifted through business school. And then when I finished business school, I was 28 years old. I'm 39 now. I was 28 years old, and I was all my friends had jobs and were seemingly doing things in life, and I felt like I was completely floundering. And I had this idea of wanting to be in the real estate business, but not really understanding why. I mean, that's what I went to business school for, but I didn't really understand why I wanted to be in it. And when I finished in 2007 and tried to find a job, there were no jobs available. So I had fortunately met this amazing woman who's my wife now, who was sort of like my inspirational leader, but and she was very helpful to help me sort of track what I wanted to do. And by chance, I took a tour of I'm going to be careful with terminology. So for the last 10 years, up until June, I was the managing partner for Goldman Properties, doing this and doing other deals, which we can talk about if you care to talk about them. And I left in June. So now I'm still a partner with Goldman Properties here in Winwood and other places, but I'm doing my own project. So when I say we Goldman Properties past tense, I took a tour of our Miami Beach portfolio, and it was the only private sector company that I'd ever seen that was really a community development firm, but in a for-profit manner. So it was really about trying to create or make a place much better than it was than we found it. It was about working with local government. It was about influencing policy. It had an operations component because we owned and operated hotels and restaurants. And it was really this holistic sort of approach to trying to create neighborhoods. And I'd never seen anything like that before, and I was really turned on by it. So I started to harass the founder of this company, who is this amazing visionary, who deserves all the credit in the world that he's received. This guy, Tony Goldman, I penned him a letter every week to just get a meeting. And then I had to meet with this one in the company and that one in the company, but it was very apparent to me that this was not really a company, this was the Tony Goldman company, and that everything had to go through Tony. So after 6 or 7 months of harassment, he took a meeting with me, and then he was like, well, clearly you're persistent. And it was only not because I really wanted the job that much, I was just dead out of luck, I had nothing to do, and I was just harassing him. So I was offering to work for free and do all these fun things. And started then soon thereafter. And then the interesting part of this story is that when I started in 2008, the second day I was at my desk, one of my colleagues, now business partners, comes over and says, oh, I want you to know Tony Goldman is, he's fine, but he's going in for a double lung transplant next week. I just want you to know that. And it was sort of a shocking moment, but anyway, Tony, in Tony fashion, had this miraculous recovery. And then we worked together for 4.5 years, from 2008 till September 11th, 2012, when he passed away. So that's how this whole thing started, and then I'll turn it back to you so I don't just keep talking about these issues.
It's funny, and I have my own history with Goldman Properties. So when I was in college up in Philadelphia, I applied for an internship with Goldman Properties in my sophomore year summer. And I ended up taking a train to New York and to meet in their Soho offices, and I met with a gentleman there. Didn't end up getting the internship, but a few years later, as I'm researching Miami, you obviously come across Goldman Properties in 2011, and Tony's vision was one of the things that really made me interested in Winwood. I mean, a lot of folks haven't had the opportunity to interact with him. I didn't really interact with him, but you felt his presence in the neighborhood when you were hanging around here. And he had this awesome video, and I always remember some quotes from that video. And it's like, when he describes his work, it's like it's like dreaming, but with your eyes open and your feet on the ground. Yeah. And so, Tony, if you could talk about Tony a little bit more and his vision for this neighborhood and
yeah, sure.
How it came to be.
Yeah, I think, well, let me ask a couple questions first so I can direct this to be more, hopefully, favorable or interesting to the people that are here. Are people more interested, by show of hands, are you interested in the Wynwood story, the history, the past, present, and future of Wynwood from a real estate perspective? A fair amount, okay. How many people are interested in more of like sort of a career bend of like, if somebody thinks that this is interesting work, how did you get to do this? What are you doing now? Sort of a career growth model, more of like an entrepreneurship story. Who's more interested in that?
I gotta raise my hand for both.
Okay, a little bit of both. Okay, and how many people don't give a shit about any of this? No, okay, so, okay, more towards Wynwood history, but we'll do a little entrepreneurship thing too. So, Tony, my career I break down into basically 3 distinct time periods. I had like my training mentorship period with Tony from 08 to 12 until his passing. I had my sort of coming of age as I would say as an entrepreneur and as this is ridiculous to say this, but as a thought leader, and somebody who had a lot of autonomy in driving a business from 12 to 16. And then I look at 16 to 18 as this kind of like murkier time, which I'm happy to talk about too, as to why I'm doing the things that I'm doing now, which is not what I was doing before. But Tony was amazing, because when I started working, I didn't really know what I was doing. I knew that Winwood, we had just started Winwood. There seemed to be a void of leadership here from the company perspective when Tony wasn't in town, because Tony split his time between Miami and New York. And I'd find myself in this emotional cycle, getting really kind of depressed when Tony was away, because I didn't really know exactly what I should be doing or shouldn't be doing, and we weren't doing things as quickly as I wanted to be doing. And then when he would come back to town, I'd have this like enlightenment, because he was this kind of guy that was incredibly inspirational, where somebody that you really wanted to follow, like a legitimate leader. And I think the most important lesson about Tony is that he always led by example. It was never one of these guys or gals, that's your boss or whatever, that's like, this is what you should do, and then they go do something different, or they show up late to work, or they don't respond to your emails, or they don't help you, figure out a path. Tony was moderately dyslexic, so he read incredibly slowly. He didn't use a computer. And there are 2 times in my entire career where an email that was sent to him, I didn't have a response by the next morning that I woke up. So if you think about somebody who's running multiple businesses, operating businesses, real estate portfolios in different cities, in Miami and Philadelphia, Boston, New York, to have that kind of work ethic, I think is the number one lesson. The second thing really is just willing something to happen, So you see that in a negative way a lot of times with like Donald Trump, right? Where he just talks all this craziness and then sort of expects it to happen. It's sort of part of the rhetoric that happens there. But Tony would do that and then just continuously deliver. So it's like the will to have an idea and then just push and push and push and pull people in whichever ways he needed to do to make that happen. And then thirdly, I think he was, to me, a humanitarian, which he just cared about people. And the most important thing to me in the development of this neighborhood was absolutely the people that I was able to help in a way impact, like Weefy or like Panther Coffee or like Zach the Baker, or there's a lot of people that had a really nice idea, didn't have capital, didn't have expertise, just really needed an opportunity, and to be able to facilitate those people's growth is really, really cool. And I think Tony really cared about doing right by people, and that's something that I always tried to implement as we went forward.
Did that work out as far as the business? Because you guys invested in some of these concepts and really gave us good deals when, I think knowing what you knew about this area as a market, knowing where it was going and the growth it would have, maybe couldn't have predicted the rate, but you gave us room to grow. So I'm wondering how you all balance that from a company perspective in terms of you really see some entrepreneurs you want to invest in, but ultimately you have some of your own investors to respond.
Yeah, then this is all really, I'm deeply serious about this. This is all a true story. So like, I've renegotiated Zach the Baker's lease 5 times because the business that he thought he was going to do has changed time and time and time again. So it really is about working with the tenants to provide appropriate opportunities, really as partners. But yeah, I mean, we fortunately, people thought we were crazy when we were buying here because it was expensive for the time, but we were buying at a basis that I think there was still value in what we were doing, and it gave us flexibility to have relatively low lease rates to create a market, create a community, and do all those fun things. As we started to make an impact here, post Wynwood Walls and Joey's and Winwood Kitchen and Bar and the lab and all the things that started to happen, we surely lost out on a lot of economics here that others were participating in, because we had all these leases paying us $20 a foot, and other people were coming in and charging $40 or $50 a foot, and that's kind of, I feel like we've made a lot of money for a lot of other people and some of the early work that we've done. But at the end of the day, for us, and depending on how businessy you want to get this, but for how we had capitalized our portfolio, for what the way that we were trying to create value out of the real estate that we had, it's a very long-term strategy. So thinking about making, silly decisions over economics in the short term would have really cost us in creating something that's much greater than we would have done if we had taken the high rent deal in the beginning. So it was really about just trying to facilitating and foster the right environment and community to create value.
Yeah. And so what were those qualities that you look for in those entrepreneurs that you guys were able to?
Yeah, so well, this neighborhood has no residential, so there was nobody here. So we had to solve for two things. We had to solve for trying to get daytime population here, so that's really through office. But the only office that was attracted to Winwood was, more creative kind of entrepreneurial office. We were trying to create an ecosystem of people that were going to do interesting things. So the lab is a perfect example. And the early lab started in 800 square feet, and then there's a bittersweet expansion, which I'm happy to speak openly about. Maybe Wi-Fi's not, or maybe it doesn't feel that way. But when it went from 800 square feet to 9,000 square feet and took on investors and everything else, that's a dynamic shift. But we wanted to have people that were basically creating value or creating output far greater than the square footage in which they were existing. So somebody who was going to be having a lot of events and activations and bringing interesting people and looked at every single deal as to say, what is this tenant, this concept, this person, this business going to do for the community at large? So that was how we started to solve the daytime population issue. Nighttime population, we wanted to do more interesting food and beverage programming to make destination retail, destination food and beverage. We had to start there with our own operating businesses. So we, past tense, Goldman Properties, still own and operate Joey's and Winwood Kitchen and Bar. The production of the Wynwood Walls is quite an expensive endeavor. So all these things are kind of real placemaking, community engagement activities that we were doing to try to create some vibrancy. And then when you go from 2000, I say the tipping point for me is really 2012, 13, 14 into 15, with what I created and chair the Business Improvement District. So that's kind of the policy engine as well as the clean and safe group that we have here for the neighborhood. When we started to rework the zoning and create what we call the NRD, the Neighborhood Revitalization District, that's when the neighborhood really started to take off commercially, and you started to attract a lot of real interest from institutional investors and institutional developers like Related and Red Sky Capital. And this is going to sound crazy to you, but for me, I started, trying to rent warehouse space for $4 a foot on Fifth Avenue. True story. Wi-Fi started here at $15 a foot. Yeah. I'm a partner in a project I've been working on for 2 years that was supposed to close today, but we had a problem that'll close tomorrow, where we're building the class A plus, the nicest office building that's ever existed in Miami-Dade County for fact. West of Fifth Avenue, it's a $160 million development in comparison to just only, 6 years ago, begging somebody to lease space for $10 a foot. We're expecting to get $55 a foot there. So it's been kind of a cosmic shift that's still playing out, and we're at an interesting time in the macro and microeconomic cycle, which we can talk about if anyone cares about that.
No, we were essentially a victim of our own success here. Within 2 years, I think we're almost priced out of our own co-working model here in Winwood because the prices had nearly doubled. And because you gave us that room to grow. But 2012, I mean, I remember as we were building out this space and we had just signed here, I walk out to the street and I find a bullet slug just in the middle of the street. And so safety was still an issue there. And it was an issue for the first couple of years of us operating here. You know, we'd have events like we have tonight and, you know, one of you unfortunately would have a window smashed in and something stolen out if you had your things out in the backseat of your car. But we were dealing with those real safety issues here in those first couple of years. So there were some real growing pains here. And I mean, the Winwood Arts District Association and then the bid, I mean, did a good amount to make that.
Yeah, I'll talk about that for a second because I think it's really important. It's not a private sector real estate story, but in 2009 we formed something called the Wynwood Arts District Association, which was basically just an attempt to get a bunch of people from Winwood in the same room, property owners, gallerists, retailers, whoever it was, to start having a conversation about how to improve the neighborhood from a marketing perspective, from a crime perspective, cleanliness perspective. We started paying off-duty police. We started working with the Lotus House, the women's shelter down the street, if anyone knows that, to basically be our neighborhood ambassadors to come and help clean the streets. And we were doing this all through private sector funding.
The Women of Winwood.
The Women of Winwood, exactly. And we were doing all these really, I think, materially important kind of neighborhood, community engagement development things that were happening as really as a community, not just a single person doing it. And we kind of grew out of the Wynwood Arts Association and created what's the second bid in the city of Miami, the Winwood Business Improvement District in 2013, which is now kind of a real monster in a good way. I mean, we have a big operating budget that funds security, sanitation, marketing. You know, we're now collecting public benefits dollars, which if anyone cares about zoning, we can talk about that. We're collecting parking trust fund dollars. So the bid has become this economic engine that's now paying for, we're putting 70 video cameras all around the neighborhood that are going to be linked into the police main station. That's a $160,000 project that's being paid for by the bid. So we've taken a lot of these sort of public sector initiatives that you'd expect government to pay for, and we've sort of funded all of those ourselves, which should keep the neighborhood hopefully growing in a somewhat organized and cohesive fashion.
I remember the campaign for that vote. It was intense, it was contentious, but you know, the property owners here in Winwood voted to pass that.
Yeah, so we tax ourselves, if anyone, I don't know how much people know, but yeah, we tax ourselves to do this, and now we have these additional revenue streams through the rezoning that we created through development that also continue to fund the bid. And it's the only bid in the city of Miami that actually collects these types of revenues to spend them solely within the boundaries of the district.
I feel like the first year the projection was like you'd have a $700,000 budget or something.
Yeah. So we have about $1 million operating budget just to do clean, safe marketing, and then we've collected by the end of next year with projects that are in the queue. We'll probably have collected $4.5 million in development dollars that'll go to, if anyone's read about it, paying for the Woonerf on 3rd Avenue and other streetscape improvements and infrastructure projects and help subsidize parking and all this other fun stuff.
That's exciting.
I think so. It's kind of weird, but yeah, it's exciting. That's cool.
For those who don't know, the Business Improvement District is this quasi-governmental entity. You have public meetings.
Yeah, we're elected officials. So like we're elected the 440 property owners in Winwood, which is not 440 individuals because obviously more than one person owns more than one site, but we're an elected board. We're subject to sunshine and like just basically like city commissioners, and we work on policy and then all these just general kind of clean and safe marketing initiatives for the neighborhood.
See, we'll build on the policy stuff. I mean, it's part of what attracted you about Goldman's work on the beach and obviously the work that you've been able to do here.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, this is a small group. I'm sure Weefy won't care. If anyone has any questions that I think are relevant because I don't think this is going to be that organized in terms of topics, I would just throw them out.
Yeah. Burning question.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, burning question. So you mentioned the parking issue. I'm kind of surprised that earlier on you didn't actually discuss the transportation, public transportation element, which is still a bit of an issue in that whenever Winwood comes across, oh, shall we go? Oh, how are we going to get there? And some of this is wrong. There's a lot of money being flushed around now with the whole Beacon Council, Miami Development Authority. Has this issue been raised again as a means of trying to actually put money to work to get public transportation as a direct destination for Winwood and Apalaka, which is the next step over? I mean, this is something that needs to be discussed at some point. Right?
yeah, it's always been discussed. I mean, don't think we've been, ignoring that issue, but it's an issue that's in a way bigger than us. So, we were instrumental in getting the trolley as an example to kind of make Winwood as part of its route, which it is, and obviously gets used. Now with Brightline, the hope would be that we can figure out a way to get some more trolley or shuttle service happening directly between Winwood and the downtown station. There's been a series of prospective projects with the streetcar, which never is going to happen, and the tri-rail expansion with hopefully a stop here in Winwood. You might have seen a sort of a public jockeying match between whether the tri-rail station should be here in Winwood or over at north and towards the design district. So there's a lot of things that are out there, and we've been helping fund some of this ourselves, but to solve the general transportation infrastructure problem that is Miami is nothing that we can do on our own. And even building, just from a regular vehicular perspective, we past tense the last project I wanted to complete before leaving the Wynwood Garage, which is on the corner here of 26th Street, which obviously you probably noticed because it's large and well lit. But even having structured parking, I mean, that's the first structured parking facility that's fully privately funded. I mean, I worked for over a year to try to do a public-private with this Miami Parking Authority, and it's hard. It's hard. So a lot more work to do there is the answer.
But I think Wynwood's benefited from its geography. I mean, it straddles 95, the 195, and 395, and Biscayne is not too far away. So it's been relatively easy to get to, from the major arteries of the county.
Yeah, and obviously, the Ubers and the Lyfts, and have been tremendously beneficial for us because we've had a parking crisis here at high traffic times for a long time. So fortunately, it's been a.
And once you get here, you walk the neighborhood, you take a freebie, you skate around, you bike around. Yeah. So, on most nights you can find parking here, and it's still.
There's parking right across the street. Look at that.
So sometimes getting here is the challenge, but at least as a walkable neighborhood, it's one of the more beautiful examples of Miami being walkable.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Other burning questions?
This particular model that you've based Winwood on, where else does it exist in the country?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple ways to answer that. I mean, I think that coming out of the recession, this idea of urban revitalization and doing things that are a little bit more authentic and creative, that's become, frankly, the modern trend, right? So one of the things that we've been trying to get away from is just falling into kind of the typical new cool neighborhood, almost formula model, right? So it's not that much different than a shopping center that may have Forever 21 and whatever store that just kind of travel around the country. There's a lot of brands and concepts that kind of do that in these types of neighborhoods. So I think the way that I've tried to counteract that is by focusing on local talent, which is not replicatable. There's only replicable. There's only one Zach the Baker. There's only one Panther Coffee. There's only one Wilfredo. So doing that while still trying to sprinkle in more credit-worthy spaces that are more nationally recognized, like a Warby Parker, to try to make the neighborhood have this sort of push and pull against what's really commercial versus what's just strictly independent, while still trying to manage. Obviously, we're a for-profit business, so trying to figure out ways to do these things in a way that hopefully in turn will create value and make money for us and our investors.
But Tony did this before in New York, so this was not the first of his. He did this in Soho in New York. He did some of it in Philadelphia. So he was just replicating a project.
And they're all different. You know, I mean, there's a lot of the same themes and elements, but they're all different. The thing that's most interesting with Winwood to me is that you know, our portfolio in Soho is very much about showcasing the architectural features of those buildings, cast iron buildings, the old manufacturing buildings of Soho, the cobble street of Green Street. A lot of those things were in play. Philadelphia has a very specific architectural form, yeah, but still like very contextually relevant. Miami Beach was all about preserving Art Deco and showing off Art Deco and doing that. Wynwood is a warehouse district. It looks like every other warehouse district you could find pretty much anywhere in the country. But what's unique, and some of you will probably appreciate this if you care about the city of Miami, what's unique about Wynwood is that there are very few commercial districts in the city of Miami that span length and width, right? So the typical Miami model is Biscayne Boulevard, where you drive down a commercial corridor, it's all commercial, and then you have residential behind it. And for people that think that the Biscayne corridor is going to be this great walkable district, they're smoking crack, it's never going to happen. And it may have its, secular kind of runs, but it's not going to be that because nobody wants to walk up and down a highway. That's most of the way that the city of Miami was planned in any of these commercial areas that are not right in the core of downtown. So Winwood for the city of Miami has this very kind of unique length and width that allowed it to have a grid system that was walkable. So then the challenge was, since it was just nondescript buildings, we had the good fortune of some very early public art, street art, making it, that was very authentic to the neighborhood, like Purvis Young and some of the early street art work by Primary Flight and some of these murals to start to capture that, to create a sense of place and a vocabulary that was unique to Winwood, similar to how, to your point, the cast iron buildings were unique to Soho and the Art Deco was unique to Miami Beach. And then just the great phenomenon of what really happened here is you were using all these large-scale murals to create vibrancy and excitement within the street, and then social media happened and Instagram happened, and then kind of the rest is history. So, the Winwood Walls, all that was done well before Instagram existed, and street art now is a pop culture phenomenon. I mean, it's in every city in the world and everybody uses it. But in 2009, when we started the Wynwood Walls project, it was actually pretty bold to do that. And again, that's just like one of the very many elements that created this sort of the Big Bang theory of Winwood, which is a lot of factors creating value that was much greater than sort of any of us are really specifically responsible for. So a lot of factors at play.
So 14, 15, the Warby Parker, Shinola, a couple of those brands start to show up. How are they doing? How has Winwood treated them? Are brands like that able to actually survive here? Yeah,
Winwood is like a food and beverage phenomenon. So I don't think you could find another area, even Miami Beach included, in Miami-Dade County that has the sales volumes and the amount of sales volumes that Winwood has from an F&B perspective. Out of respect for my tenants, I won't tell you the numbers, but if you're not doing over 1,000 per square foot in sales in a food and beverage space in Winwood, then you're kind of having problems, those are big numbers. I mean, that means in my business, that means you can pay $100 a foot in rent and you should be able to stomach it. So they've been doing phenomenally well. Warby Parker does phenomenally well. And I think Warby Parker does well, and the reason why I really wanted them here is that they have a product that's really accessible by many, many people, right? It's price point, it's style, it's accepted by the masses. And what we're trying to do here has always been to be inclusionary. The design district is lovely and it's great and it's an incredible project, but I find it to be exclusionary, right? I mean, I can go to a store there and buy a shirt, but I feel uncomfortable doing so. Everything here is about trying to make people feel comfortable. So Warby Parker does really well because I think they have the right price point, they have the right product, and they're at the right location. People that have higher price point product have had a harder time in being successful from a dry retail perspective because we don't have the density of those types of retailers to make it a destination for people to come and spend a series of hours going back and forth shopping. So the big winners in this segment or this moment of the Winwood story are the food and beverage players.
So you can break down your Winwood experience into probably a couple of different segments. You're now transitioning into a new segment. How are you thinking about Winwood over the next few years? You're involved in a big project you've already talked about, but if you can predict, or just your general feelings on the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think the next few years are going to be a little choppy for sure. There's a lot of supply. I mean, this is more of a business side of the conversation, but there's a lot of supply. There's a lot more supply coming online. But at the same time, we have more people than ever before. I'll give you an example. In November of 2017, we had 85,000 parking transactions here in Winwood. Winwood gets more parking transactions than anywhere else in Miami-Dade County. So people coming and paying for parking, 85,000 parking transactions the month of November. That was a crazy number. Yeah. This past November, so last month there was 127,000. So you're looking at a 40,000+ delta year over year, which is pretty wild. So I think that the long-term runway for investing and developing and building Winwood is kind of like the longest in the city of Miami, because I think we have a zoning code that caps supply. We have a zoning code that's cohesive and thoughtful, and we're in a geographic location that is, first off, the highest in the city of Miami. We're basically between 14 and 17 or 18 feet above sea level. So big projects like Wynwood 25, you may have seen, they have a full level of underground parking with no water enclosures. That's fully kind of above the water table. And I think we have some amazing content here that's really unmatched. So I think you said it in the beginning, but I think the next couple of years there are going to be some winners and some losers, but I think from a long-term perspective, it's an amazing place to be invested in working. And even though I've moved on from my Goldman role, I'm obviously still here and working on some other projects.
A few years ago was the first time I heard west of Winwood. So there's obviously been a lot of folks who, were rooted here that are moving westward, the Rubel collection being one of them. What are your thoughts on, the next district, if you will? Is there a next district that you think has similar promise?
That's interesting. I mean, I think that most people, and I'm biased because I think I grew up sort of under the mentorship of one of the greatest placemakers or visionaries in the real estate business. But I think a lot of people don't realize the amount of time and money and effort and creativity that went into putting together a neighborhood that had enough unique and identifiable themes that made it compelling and interesting. So there's some other people that have bought large assets, and whether it's in Allapattah or in Little River or East Little Havana, I mean, there's lots of other things going on, but I don't see sort of a platform set up right now that's doing all the things that we were doing to create that early value to make something much greater than we've sort of found it. Plus, Miami's changed a lot. So the idea of having sort of a creative entrepreneur or creative class-focused neighborhood, which Winwood was for sure through this development pattern, there's a lot of people trying to shoot for that, whether it's like technology, innovation, arts, and all these things. Miami is just not that deep. So I don't think that we have, thousands and thousands and thousands of qualified, capitalized, creative entrepreneurs to then all of a sudden create a city that's just filled with all these creative ecosystems. So I guess in conclusion, I think that those neighborhoods, all these things that are happening are going to be competing for a lot of the same players, wherefore at least from 2008 to 2014, 15, it was only, in my view, and maybe someone can disagree, if it's fine, but to me it was only Winwood. It was like you were in Winwood or you were kind of nowhere. When you were looking for space, it was like
downtown or you're
right, but then it's like, right, not really. So now it's like, well, am I going to go and try to go west of Winwood or east of Winwood or Allapattah or Little River, or, on the river? I mean, there's a lot of people trying to kind of promote this development because Miami has this, we ramp up high and then ramp down fast. So there's going to be some losers, short-term losers, I think, over the next few years.
And the economics are tough to have a district like this or the opportunity.
Oh, and people think, yeah, and I'm very open with all things, the economics and everything that anyone cares about. But we started investing here in 2005, 6. Our first year of having positive cash flow. I'm not saying making any money. I'm talking about just where at the end of a month we didn't owe somebody money. Was February of 2014. Wow. So. Everybody thought all along, like, oh, you guys, you're making all this. No, I mean, that's not the case at all.
What do you think of the 7th Avenue corridor?
I mean, 7th Avenue's very similar to what I was describing before. I mean, for the most part, it's commercial and, with residential on the side. So it's not really a hub.
Tony Goldman pulling it all together.
No, I don't think so. But it's a great vehicular corridor. And I do think, we're building this project I mentioned earlier that I'm building with my partners out of Chicago behind us. Huh?
Tell us about that project.
Sure. Well, let me tell you about this project. So it's on 26th Street, in between 26th and 27th Street. So it's right back here. It's actually west of 5th Avenue. So this is bold. This is bold. The project itself is 500,000 square feet. It's 250,000 feet of office and about 30,000 square feet of retail and about 485 parking spaces. So for comparison, the Winwood garage that we just built over here is 430 parking spaces and some office and some retail. So that is and that whole project is 240,000 square feet. So this is 500,000 square feet. So this is big, and it's a play to see if it's being built fully on spec. So for those of anyone's in the real estate business, that means we don't have any tenants signed up for it. And it's a play to see if we can really draw, market shaping, hopefully, creative tenants, because it's one of the few buildings you'll see in Miami that's built rear loaded corridor, side corridor, meaning when you come off of, if anyone's been in an office building in Miami, because we have small tenants in Miami, you come off your office and you come out of an elevator and you walk left or right? Like your core is in the center and you walk left or right and you see which way you want to go. Imagine you'll get off in the first 5 floors, it's 24,000 square feet. And above that, between 6 and 10, it's 36,000 square feet. So imagine an old great loft building where you get off the back of an elevator and you look in front of you, and imagine having 36,000 square feet clear. So if there were to be a large tenant that wanted to have an open space floor plan the way that more modern office tenants work, this is kind of the only building in Miami that's really designed for that type of user. 14-foot ceilings, and it's designed by Gensler, and it's a big time project.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, just hyper local stuff. Northwest 5th for me has always been kind of this dream boulevard that Winwood hopefully one day has as a really active place beyond, the interesting fashion retailers that are there now. But, it's got this amazing median, it's got trees, it's got large sidewalks. So it's an exciting place.
Yeah, and actually what I'd always hoped would happen with the zoning, which we won't geek out on too hard, but where we're building that is only for office, really. And the hope is that even though the zoning is very flexible everywhere, is that rents, retail rents and restaurant rents within the core of the district hopefully will remain high enough that the idea of raising a building and building a new building and providing parking and doing all these things is kind of, in a way, not economically feasible. So hopefully, if everything goes as planned, you'll see some big buildings in the core, but most of the bigger buildings that you'll see should be on the peripheral. There's more intensive zoning on the peripheral, meaning North Miami Avenue, 29th Street. So we'd love to have buildings like this be built and then have all those people sort of funnel into a more human scale kind of environment as they come into the center of the district. But it'll be a mix, But 8 stories is the maximum, which is here, to me is not excessive either. I mean, the garage is the tallest, biggest kind of building that you'll see in the core, and I don't find it oppressive. Maybe some people do, which I'm happy to hear, but I think it works.
Sorry, I almost lost my question there. Companies like Amazon, who wanted to consider Miami as a headquarter, do you think if they were to choose Miami, they would shape the Winwood area for better or worse, or would there be some kind of sense of control to not lose its identity?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And actually, I'll relate it back to this office project that we're building, because I think it's relevant. I'd like to think that everybody says, oh, Wynwood's a better place for me, meaning my employees are going to be happier in Winwood than they would be in downtown or somewhere else. But then I'm also pragmatic, so I know there's not enough residential, transportation's difficult. So many large companies may not favor Winwood over a more CBD style space. So it was important in conceiving this project that we were building something that was kind of head and shoulders above anything else, so that hopefully somebody comes to the building, if they aren't in love with the neighborhood, they say, well, you know what, but this building is where I want to be. I can have my signage on I-95. I can make a real impact. This building's designed differently. It's only truly, what would be considered a modern creative office building, and I believe really in the city of Miami. Because I do think that even though I'm like a Winwood guy, and I drink the Winwood Kool-Aid, I think some other people don't find it quite as compelling. I do think generally, the nighttime vibrancy and the ability to, get a bite here, drink there, whatever, I think is quite compelling, especially in trying to, attract a younger, employment base, which is obviously very competitive to attract talent in Miami. So I do think that this is a compelling place to work. This building in particular, and of course the neighborhood as a whole.
Yeah. Andrew, one of the original lab members, journeyed.
So just one of the things I saw during Basel, going through my Instagram stories, is hashtag aesthetic Winwood is dead.
Yeah.
And you saw that?
Yeah.
So obviously it came from an artist, and earlier you mentioned, Tony identifying areas, which the young lady over there mentioned, identifying areas where creatives are doing something unique, and then went in and did, this thing. And you also mentioned that you like to be inclusionary in the way things are built and, price points of the retailers, et cetera. What are you doing with regards to trying to preserve the core, the heart of what started this? As in, for instance, some developers are doing lofts and residences for artists, kind of focusing heavily on that community, making sure they can afford where they're actually living and working, are building and living in their studios. So, is there any sort of plan for that, or sort of trying to help to preserve that and get away from this Winwood is dead sort of narrative that has developed among some of the early artists that are working?
Yeah, I guess let me first address the narrative, because I always think it's interesting when people talk about gentrification or the pushing out of certain people, whether it's commercial or residential, whatever it may be.
I was intentionally not using that word.
No, I understand. Well, it's actually not a typical gentrification story here, because this is was a commercial landscape where there's been commercial shifting, not as much residential shifting as you'd see in other cities where a lot of buildings have been converted that had residential already within them. So this is a little bit different. But to me, it's like, the Winwood is dead thing to me just means that other areas have growth. And I really believe that. So, if Winwood could house everybody that was maybe housed here, then the whole play in Little River and Little Haiti and Allapattah and all of that stuff doesn't really make any sense. So to me, when people feel that a neighborhood's transitioning or evolving, that just means that something's evolving somewhere else, which may be considered a positive feature. So I don't look at that as all bad. Plus, I think that bringing in new residential assets, new office assets, and new product types is just another stage along a development cycle in a city that's constantly changing. So you can't have it both ways. For past tense, us as a company, I mean, we take our relationships with our tenants very seriously. So as I mentioned earlier, like with Zach DeBaker, we've been through many negotiations of that lease and those economics, because Zach's grown at an exponential rate and didn't want him to have punitive economics against him, because we capitalized his whole business. So there's a lot of factors at play there. That's not just a typical landlord-tenant type of deal. From the arts perspective, I still think, I was here during Basel, of course. There's still more artists painting and walls that are being treated. Everybody's incorporating art into every one of their projects. We have our own design review committee that we created as part of the bid that reviews everyone's projects and makes sure that things are being incorporated appropriately. So I think that's a little bit silly. I think that that street art, murals, et cetera, have been put on a whole nother sort of level because of the work in Winwood. So to say that Winwood is dead is...
Obviously, I mean, it's silly to have that passion, but I just wanted to point out what exactly. Yeah, everyone comes in every year. They do the murals. A lot of these guys are international artists themselves. They collaborate with local. But aside from that wonderful time of year, which is my first time of year, here in Miami or Basel, what gets done for the guys who literally cannot pay rent anymore. I understand it's a business.
Yeah, no, it's imperfect, and there's no, like Winwood in particular, it's all privately owned. So if the Goldmans were to decide tomorrow they want to raise the Wynwood Walls, and there was some funny story in like The Onion or something that the Walgreens is moving into the Wynwood Walls. I mean, that's obviously not happening, but it was funny. Like people actually like calling me and being like, "Oh, what are they paying in rent?" I'm like, dude. But yeah, so it is all within the private sector's control. And as prices get to a certain place, and with land prices and everything else, obviously the choices that you make based on economics start to shift. So that's one thing that we never cracked perfectly. Not even perfectly, I don't think well, is the sustainability of kind of the people that help make the place. We did things that we could, related to changing the parking ratios for art galleries and trying to help with artistic intervention in buildings and trying to keep it in that regard. So I think we did a good job in a very imperfect scenario.
I think an example of the two sides of that, on 25th Street, you have this body shop that's been renovating amazing classic cars, and then you have Walt Gray's Vintage with a beautiful classic car and guitar gallery, both existing within a half a block of each other.
Different type of art.
I don't know how you perceive me, but I think I'm just like an average guy that was given a great opportunity that's tried to make something of it here in Winwood. But I will tell you that I'm so proud of what the corner of 26th Street and 3rd Avenue has become to me. I think this is incredible. So if you stand at that corner, 3 of those blocks are ours and 1 is not. But you stand at that corner, you have Zach the Baker in a 7,000 square foot, artisanal bakery. That Zach is as authentic and legit as you can find anywhere in the country, I think, producing product that rivals what anyone else can do. So you have this like super hyper local dude on one corner. You have the next corner at the bottom of the garage, which I think is architecturally interesting, and I'm proud of that project that we built. You don't know this yet because it's not open unless you follow this very closely, but we have a 22,000 square foot tenant moving into the bottom of the garage called Punch Bowl Social, which is, it's a chain. There's 20 something of them around the country, but it is a super fun, family friendly, kind of all age hangout that has food and beverage and bowling and arcade and, kind of a much cooler version of what a Lucky Strike used to be, if anyone knows what I'm describing. And I think that's really fun because Winwood is actually an all-age demographic, and I don't know, I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. I don't have anywhere really to come and hang out with my kids in Winwood. I'm going to come there and hang out and watch a game or do whatever. Sure. And then on the other corner, you have something that's so, I think, world-class with So Miami. You have a guy, Bill Goldstein, who now has a 7,000 square foot new Walt Grace, featuring the best vintage guitars and cars really you could find anywhere in the world. And then a fourth corner that's not owned by us, that's just sitting there as an old shoe wholesaler. And to me, that's like, I don't know, I would put that intersection up against any other intersection anywhere in the country for having a series of like interesting, dynamic, fully differentiated, one sort of hobby business that actually does very well, which is Walt Grace, this guy who's poured his heart and soul into making bread, and then a more, appropriately capitalized by Catterton, which is the kind of the largest private equity shop that backs Punch Bowl into that. That's just, I don't know, that's what to me, that's the success of this neighborhood. So do I look at the fact that Punch Bowl is moving in there as being like Winwood's lost its soul? Like, no, I think quite the opposite. I think now the 120,000 parking transactions have another place where they can actually go hang out and have a differentiated experience than what they would have had before. So I'm proud of how that actually has happened.
Yeah, you'll still be here on a weekday and see shoes being unloaded from semis, you know?
Yeah, and that's cool, you know, and at some point in time, most of those will go away, and then it'll be something else hopefully will be cool in its place. But I think from where we are right now, especially from, when you're talking about from 2011 and what's only been 7 years, I mean, I don't know, just feel pretty good about it.
No, that's awesome. We have grass here now. That's amazing.
Yes.
The grass is greener. Any burning questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
As far as the identity of an incubator, what potential does Winwood have for that? Because I see that there's the creatives that live here, and they obviously love the community, and the community loves them back. But from a business standpoint, you know, there's some difficult trials there for them. What value would it be for Winwood as a whole in the future to just kind of invest in both the people that live here and the people that are growing up here, to have them almost be ambassadors to the city, so that people in New York know, oh yeah, Winwood, you're from Winwood? I know, you're a Winwood kid. Okay, you know, I know that place is very reputable for having like, you know, deep sense artists and so on.
Yeah. I actually think it's a better question for him, but I will frame it for him, because when this talks a little bit about kind of what the lab was, what it is, where it's going, but when Weefy came with the idea, the lab was love, art, business, and basically what he was trying to create was what I perceived as a social impact incubator to help people that maybe didn't have all the opportunities that, you know, Weefy's this brilliant guy, went to this great high school, Teach for America, Penn, you know, all these wonderful things, to try to help other people, you know, incubate them, to help them grow their businesses. I mean, that was, so to me, to answer your question, like, that's what I was saying earlier, as a real estate person, I don't think our responsibility is to try to put great people in the spaces that we own, to try to really create value from. So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna have to wait 20 years to meet the folks that were born here in some of these lofts, you know, because grew up here. I was born and raised in Coral Gables. I still live in Coral Gables. I bike here to the lab, you know, on most days. So, you know, I think Little San Juan, Little Puerto Rico to the north of 29th Street, that's the residential neighborhood that we could consider Winwood. But if we're just talking about the Arts District and, you know, 29th to 20th and kind of this square that we deal with, or rectangle rather, there just haven't been a lot of folks that were born and raised here. So for us, the building of the lab and the building of the platform was, let's create a space for all of Miami to experiment. And we knew, and we know it better now, that this was a place that would attract the world, right? And as it has, you know, we saw that in the last couple of weeks as folks, you know, flocked here to see the walls and everything else. But I mean, the Lab Miami, if you just think about the name, and this was very intentional, it was a laboratory for Miami. And so folks that would come through here would interact with the space, would use the space, and whether they were members or just hosting an event here, would be a part of that Miami story of being something interesting happening in the city. So for us, you know, Zach is an ambassador of Miami. You know, we are ambassadors of Miami. Everyone who's done something here play that role. I don't think, you know, Winwood is one of the badges that we wear, but I proudly represent a lot of different parts of the city because it is one city. This is one unique neighborhood. We are fortunate to have played a role in its development. But I think now there's a generation of folks who have been a part of something here over the last, let's call it decade, that are taking those experiences elsewhere and are continuing to kind of share what we've learned here over the last years, which I've learned a lot.
And it's just to reiterate that, I mean, it's also a very select few people that were here prior to 2008. I mean, we can talk about, you know, all the artists and the, you know, I'm actually making this up, all the artists living in all these loft spaces that were producing all this amazing work and doing, that's not really the case. There was very few people that were here. Most people that were here were shoe wholesalers, and there was definitely some, some artists and some galleries and some cool stuff, but it was a very limited.
Larry Mizrock.
Yeah, Larry Mizrock. I mean, may he rest in peace. But so really, when we opened Joey's in 2008, that was the first time that slightly more people started to come, because there was a destination that people started to pay a little bit more attention to. So that story is hasn't been written yet, right? Because it's so new, and that's actually sort of a typical sort of path for Miami, because Miami is such a young city and is constantly evolving and changing.
I see the potential.
Yeah.
I do. Like, if this city can be just as powerful of quality and quantity as San Francisco without the brand. I lost my train of thought. Give me a second to think about it.
That's okay. Larry Mizrock is an awesome character in Wynwood's history. I mean, the guy who was involved in the early textile manufacturing days of Winwood.
The guy that used to own this building was this guy named Danny Zalonker, who was in the shoe trade and became a real estate broker, and then financed this. We didn't have a lot of money, so Goldman didn't have a lot of money, so we were every kind of bizarre structure you could come up with option contracts and seller financing and prepaid rent with option. I mean, it was just anything you could imagine. So Danny Zalonker, held the mortgage on this building for many, many years, and would always, call me, sort of kick himself. I can't believe I sold you that building for that, But anyway, there's a lot of those stories. And most of the people that were here, were owner-operators of some wholesaling kind of business. There was no real estate company making a play on this up until the first, he's far from institutional, but the first guy who thought about this really from an investment perspective was David Lombardi in probably 2001. So we're that's not that long ago.
Yeah.
I do remember what I was going to say. So, Wifi,
Yeah.
as far as the lab, would you see this as more of a entrepreneurial resource center, or could you look at it as a mentorship for people who want to be entrepreneurs?
It's both. I think for the folks that have worked here on a day-to-day basis, they learn every day from the fellow members that they share space with. As a resource center, there is content that's being produced here, both by the lab and by its members and folks from the community. So, the idea was to be able to just have a space, a physical space, where folks can host things. And I think now with Lab Ventures and the incubation they're doing of actual companies, it's a capital resource as well. So companies are being built out of here, which is something new and special. So it's all those things. Formally, there's never been a structured program where you come in here and in 8 weeks you're raising capital. It's always been driven by the community and just the energy of the folks coming together. So it's all those things in different forms and fashions.
Do you think that in the future potentially could be developing into a structured program to kind of find people who, because you want to put tenants who are local and who are qualified to represent you and the city. But that's a process. Not everyone who says, I want to do blank is going to actually be able to pull through. So is that an area that needs development for you guys?
For the lab, I can just speak from experience. I think there are other folks, Endeavor being one of them, that are focusing on scaling entrepreneurs. There are a handful of incubators that I've had the pleasure of being a part of, whether it's the Idea Center at Miami-Dade College or Startup FAU, that are formal programs that work at the early stages. You have SCORE, you have the Small Business Development Center, you have Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses, which some of the companies that we talked about tonight, Panther Coffee, for example, participated in. So now there are resources, I think, for the early stages of companies and for the later stages of companies. So it's just time and capital and learning and growth that needs to happen. But I think entrepreneurs have a lot of different options and resources now all around the city. Yeah, that weren't available here some years ago.
The business is a reflection of the person running it on the inside, so you got to make sure that they're qualified and ready to lead that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's good. I didn't know that. Full disclosure, guys, I've lived in Florida most of my life. I'm just not finding out about Wynwood, like, as of this week.
Oh, welcome.
So I'm like very excited about
Where
this.
do you live in Florida?
West Palm.
Okay.
Well, now you can take the Bright Line down and
Exactly. There you go. Take the train, and then we'll get the shuttle from the train over.
And it's only in the past couple of years that I've been seeking a community like this. So now that I found it, I love it.
Yeah.
And I want to add value and do whatever I can to help.
cool. Well, welcome to Winwood. It is not dead.
Tell all the person living under a rock.
Success because I used to live in Lake Worth. It's definitely had a turnaround, and it's still in the process now. They did a lot of property development, and they make these some art studios. My neighbor used to make art furniture, and they're very successful. So I kind of see you guys are a step ahead of that because they're just now starting this whole project.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. So, this, as I said when I started, this has come full circle. This was one of the first spaces we even toured as part of our search for space when we had the idea in 2011. Joe was a big part of stewarding that. Goldman Properties, as our graceful landlord, was a big part of making this all happen. So without them, this would not be possible. So thank you to Joe for believing in us, for believing, in some weird folks with weird ideas. Miami would be a different place if we had more folks like Joe, more folks like Tony Goldman, who, really took big and long bets on neighborhoods and really put a lot of capital to work and a lot of sweat equity into these neighborhoods. So I think it's a testament, that we're sitting here to folks like the Goldmans and the company they built, and to folks like yourself who, really take the time and the patience to work with small businesses to build neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Because this is what it's all about.
And we're trying, and also, I guess for a fun fact, I have a series of other projects I'm doing, but one that I think is fun to mention because it's kind of may feel peculiar, but I'm really excited about it is one of my dear friends and collaborators here is this wonderful girl, Della Hyman, who's the owner, founder of the Winwood Yard. And, Della's obviously, I don't know if, not obviously if you don't follow this, but her space was acquired by Lennar, who's going to build a bunch of apartments. Anyway, so Della and I have partnered to now open a project that's, I would say similar, but it's significantly different, but similar sort of soul to it out in Doral. So, okay, people say, oh, well, Doral, why Doral? That's a terrible place. But I don't think that way at all. I think that there's certain stigmas around certain places, but I think everybody in any market deserves to have differentiated, interesting content and experience. And I think that especially when a market may get saturated with a lot of activity, for you as an example, if you're in another market that doesn't have some of these things, it's easier to see them sort of operating and functioning, and then exporting those into a market that maybe needs them, that hopefully will have some similar success. So I think that people, everybody wants to have these types of experiences, and I think creating an interesting place, an interesting destination is all about the content and the programming that goes into them. So my hope is that people, I'm not expecting all of you to drive to Doral to come to the Doral Yard, but I am hoping that the same ecosystem that Della was able to create at the Winwood Yard here in Winwood for the people that are more centrally located here, I'm hoping that we can create out there, and the impact on the human, and hopefully giving them a place that they feel they have pride in and that they have ownership of is kind of what we're trying to do.
Be an interesting experiment to follow.
I like what you said before about, Goldman came here and stayed here. It's not an easy job to develop a community, and he didn't look for a quick return. I've been financing projects, businesses, and real estate. I'm March Weber.
Yeah, I did.
For a lot of years.
Legend here.
Yeah.
I've been doing it, hundreds
You never
of
called me back, by the way.
I worked with Zach, I've done the R House, and a lot of things in Winwood.
You're helping Della too.
I'm helping Della. So I'm very involved, but what I like about Tony is he didn't come in, make a quick fortune, and disappear. And that is the problem with Miami, because so many of these developers come in from other communities, buy it up, build it up, and go away. And that is a problem, because they make their quick buck, but they're not a part of the community. So why I respect Tony so much is he invested a lot in it, and with his heart and with his soul. And remember, Tony was really into the arts, into music and art, and he loved that. And so that's what he saw for this community. And that's why I respect him so much, because think of how many developers have stayed on. There's a few that have, like Tibor Hollow has been here for many, many years. Tibor has made a fortune, and his family has, going very, very high. But there aren't too many of them. They come and they go. And I've dealt with many of them. Della's a wonderful woman. We've got some good talent. The idea is keeping people like that in this community. I don't want to lose them.
Can I add to what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Most life in general is just dealing with people. That's like 95% of life. You know, the money, like Goldman, you know, they have it in their back pocket. You got to talk to a person in order to get to that, to be able to fund neighborhoods like this. So keeping people in the neighborhood is important, and developing their skills. I mean, you could take somebody who doesn't know too much, but they have that drive and ambition, and they could serve a purpose to maybe run as mayor, something crazy like that. And giving them the opportunity, giving them the resources and knowledge and mentorship. They're local, so they're definitely going to have a heart for this place, because they're, they were born here. They've seen it grow, and they've grown along with it. So it's almost like a marriage.
I agree with you. I think I used to run SCORE, and I was a financial counselor for SBDC, and I've been working in many capacities as a real estate finance person for many years. But I think that I want to keep young people in this community. I want them to be able to earn enough money that they can stay here and still fulfill their passion. And so what I do is I mentor people now. I take the young community and I mentor them so that I can help them develop their skills. And that to me is my goal.
That's a beautiful goal.
And we're going to end on that beautiful goal. If you have the chance to speak with Miss Marjorie, please do. So we have plenty of food and drink, but before, just a round of applause for Joe. Thank you, Joe. And thank you all for coming to Brainfood.